There's a moment when someone attacks you publicly, their voice rising with righteous indignation, their finger pointed like a sword at your chest, and the entire room turns to watch your reaction. Most people crumble. They defend, explain, justify, or counterattack with equal fury. But you do something that makes the air itself seem to thicken with an invisible pressure. You smile slightly, say absolutely nothing, and watch as their composure dissolves in real time while yours remains crystalline and unbreakable. This is the moment you understand that true power has nothing to do with the volume of your voice or the sharpness of your tongue. It has everything to do with the terrifying calm that radiates from someone who knows they don't need to prove anything to anyone. Ever. Welcome to the philosophy of silent dominance, where your refusal to break becomes the most devastating weapon in your arsenal. The ancient masters understood what modern conflict has forgotten. The person who maintains their center while everyone else loses theirs doesn't just win the immediate battle. They win something far more valuable. They win the recognition, buried deep in the primitive brain of every witness, that they are dealing with someone who operates from a fundamentally different level of existence. When Marcus, a mid-level executive, stands up in the quarterly meeting and says, "I think Sarah's numbers are completely unrealistic, and frankly, I question whether she understands our market at all," most people would immediately launch into a defensive explanation. Sarah doesn't. She tilts her head slightly, maintains direct eye contact for exactly 3 seconds longer than feels comfortable, and then says with the kind of calm that makes people's skin crawl, "That's interesting, Marcus." Then she returns to her presentation as if he hadn't spoken at all. The room doesn't just notice the non-reaction, they feel it. Marcus, who expected to rattle her, finds himself the one who's been rattled. His face reddens. He shifts in his seat. The very silence he intended to force her to fill becomes a void that swallows his confidence whole. This is the first principle of silent dominance. Never explain what doesn't require explanation, and never defend what doesn't require defense. The moment you rush to justify your existence, you've already lost. You've confirmed that their opinion carries enough weight to move you, and power never, ever confirms weakness in others. But let's go deeper, because this isn't just about winning office politics or social dynamics. This is about understanding the fundamental architecture of human psychology and how confidence, real confidence, creates a gravitational field that pulls everyone else into orbit around it. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, but he also understood something more subtle. It is better to be calmly, mysteriously untouchable than to be either feared or loved. Because fear requires constant reinforcement, and love requires constant validation. Untouchability requires nothing except the unshakable knowledge that you are enough, exactly as you are, without anyone else's permission or approval. When someone attacks you on social media, posting a long rant about how you're wrong, how you've misunderstood something, how you need to educate yourself, the instinct is to respond immediately, to craft the perfect counter-argument, to screenshot and mock, to rally your own supporters. Don't. Instead, like the response 15 minutes later, not with words, but with a simple emoji that suggests you found their outrage mildly amusing. Then watch as they write 3 more increasingly desperate posts, trying to get you to engage, each one making them look more unhinged while you remain the calm center of the storm. This is psychological warfare at its most elegant. You're not just refusing to play their game, you're demonstrating that their game is beneath your notice, and that demonstration is visible to everyone watching. Here's what happens in the neural pathways of the person trying to provoke you. When you don't react the way they expect, their brain interprets your calm as either supreme confidence or dangerous unpredictability. Both interpretations work in your favor. Supreme confidence suggests you know something they don't. Dangerous unpredictability suggests that engaging with you might have consequences they can't predict or control. Either way, you've just rewired their relationship to you from person I can manipulate to person I need to be careful around. Let's examine the romantic arena, where this philosophy becomes even more potent. When your partner comes home spoiling for a fight, when they've constructed an elaborate narrative about something you did or didn't do, when they're practically vibrating with the need to make you react, most people either match their energy or collapse into apologetic submission. You do neither. Instead, you listen completely. You maintain eye contact. You nod occasionally. And when they finish their tirade, you say, "I can see you're really upset about this. What would you like me to do?" No defensiveness, no counter-accusations, no emotional matching. Just a calm, almost clinical response that treats their emotional storm like weather you're observing from inside a very sturdy house. This response does something devastating to manufactured conflict. It refuses to provide the emotional fuel that keeps artificial drama burning. When someone is looking for a fight and you respond with genuine curiosity instead of defensiveness, you've just revealed that their emotional manipulation has no purchase on your inner landscape. The advanced version of this technique involves something even more psychologically sophisticated. When they accuse you of not caring, of being cold, of being emotionally unavailable, you respond with warmth, but not submission. You say, "I care about you enough to not let this conversation become something we'll both regret. When you're ready to talk about solutions instead of problems, I'm here." This isn't passive aggression disguised as wisdom. This is actual wisdom that happens to have the side effect of being devastating to people who try to control others through emotional chaos. But here's where this transcends simple interpersonal strategy and becomes something approaching an art form. The deepest level of silent dominance isn't about winning conflicts with other people. It's about winning the conflict with your own need for external validation. When you no longer need other people to think you're right, smart, successful, or worthy, you become functionally immune to their attempts to make you prove those things. This immunity isn't indifference, it's discernment. You care about the opinions of people whose judgment you respect and who have earned the right to influence your thinking. Everyone else gets polite attention and nothing more. Watch what happens when someone questions your expertise in a group setting. "I'm not sure you really understand the complexity of this issue," they say, with that particular tone that suggests you're about to be educated. Most people immediately launch into a recitation of their credentials, their experience, their track record. You don't. You say, "You might be right," and then continue with whatever you were doing. This response is so unexpected, so counterintuitive, that it creates a kind of cognitive short circuit in the person who was trying to diminish you. They were prepared for defensiveness, which would have given them something to attack. They were prepared for counterattack, which would have given them something to deflect. They were not prepared for casual agreement, followed by complete indifference to their assessment. What you've just done is demonstrate that their evaluation of your competence is interesting information, but not crucial data. You've shown that your sense of your own capabilities doesn't rise or fall based on their recognition or lack thereof. And that demonstration, witnessed by everyone present, immediately elevates your status while diminishing theirs. The person who needs to prove their intelligence is automatically less impressive than the person who simply operates from intelligence without announcement. This brings us to the existential core of silent dominance. It's not really about dominating other people. It's about achieving such complete self-possession that other people's attempts to disturb your equilibrium become impossible. You become like water that cannot be cut, like air that cannot be grasped, like space that cannot be disturbed. In professional settings, this translates to something approaching supernatural effectiveness. When someone tries to take credit for your work in a meeting, you don't frantically correct the record. You wait, you watch, And then, at the moment when their claim has been fully heard, you say something like, "I'm glad James found the research I shared with him so useful." It's always rewarding when collaborative efforts work out well. Notice what you've just done. You've reclaimed your contribution without directly contradicting their claim. You've made it clear who did the original work without making them look like an outright liar. You've demonstrated grace under pressure while simultaneously making everyone in the room question James's integrity. And you've done it all with such smoothness that they can't even argue with your response without looking petty. This is power dynamics as a surgical instrument rather than a bludgeon. The timing of these interventions matters enormously. Speaking too quickly suggests urgency, which suggests insecurity. Speaking too slowly suggests calculation, which can appear manipulative. The perfect timing has a quality of inevitability, as if your response is simply the natural next thing to happen in the conversation. Practice this. When someone interrupts you, don't fight for your voice back. Stop talking completely. Look at them with mild interest, as if you're curious to see where this is going. Wait until they finish. Then say, "Are you done?" with genuine curiosity, not sarcasm. When they nod or look uncomfortable, continue exactly where you left off as if they hadn't spoken. The message you've just sent is more devastating than any direct confrontation. You've demonstrated that their interruption was noticed, evaluated, and found to be unworthy of disturbing your rhythm. You've shown that you operate from such internal authority that external disruptions simply bounce off you. But let's talk about what happens when the stakes get higher, when the attacks get more personal, when someone decides to go for your vulnerabilities. This is where most people's calm facade crumbles, where the need to defend becomes overwhelming, where silent dominance faces its greatest test. Imagine someone publicly questions your character, your motives, your fundamental worth as a human being. They do it in front of people you care about, people whose opinions matter to you. Every instinct screams at you to defend yourself, to prove them wrong, to make them take it back. You do something different. You let the accusation hang in the air for a moment. You look around the room at the faces watching this unfold, and then you say, with the kind of calm that makes people wonder what you know that they don't, "That's quite a strong accusation. I hope you have something to back it up." Then you stop talking completely and you wait. What you've just done is shifted the burden of proof back to them without denying their claim or defending against it. You've forced them to either produce evidence or admit they're making unsubstantiated accusations. You've done it in a way that positions you as someone confident enough in their character to let it speak for itself. Most importantly, you've demonstrated to everyone watching that you don't crumble under pressure. You don't need to prove your worth to someone who's already decided not to see it. And that demonstration is worth more than any defense you could have mounted. This is where Machiavelli's understanding of power becomes most relevant. It's not just about being effective, it's about appearing effective. Perception shapes reality in human interactions, and the perception of unshakable calm creates its own reality. People begin to assume that your calm comes from knowledge, from confidence, from a position of strength they can't see but can definitely feel. The advanced practitioner learns to use silence itself as a form of communication. When someone makes an unreasonable demand, you don't argue about why it's unreasonable. You simply look at them for a long moment, as if you're trying to understand how they could possibly think that's something you would agree to. Then you say no, without explanation or justification. The word no, delivered with calm certainty, is one of the most powerful sounds in human language. It requires no justification because it comes from a place of such clear self-knowledge that explanation would be redundant. Watch what happens when someone tries to guilt you into something. "I can't believe you would let me down like this," they say, their voice heavy with disappointment and manipulation. Most people immediately scramble to either comply or justify their non-compliance. You do neither. You say, "I understand that you're disappointed," and then wait to see if they have anything else to add. This response acknowledges their emotion without accepting responsibility for it. It shows empathy without showing capitulation. It demonstrates that you can witness their feelings without being controlled by them. The most sophisticated version of this dynamic happens in situations where you could easily win an argument but choose not to. When someone is making claims that you know to be factually incorrect, when they're attributing motivations to you that are completely wrong, when they're operating from such a place of ignorance that correcting them would be trivial, you resist the temptation to educate them. Instead, you say something like, "That's an interesting perspective," and let them continue believing whatever they need to believe. This isn't dishonesty. It's recognition that some people's understanding of reality is more useful to them than actual reality, and that correcting them would serve your ego more than it would serve any meaningful purpose. This approach has a side effect that borders on the mystical. When you stop needing to be right all the time, when you stop needing everyone to understand you correctly, when you stop needing to win every argument you could win, people begin to sense that you operate from a depth they can't fathom. Your restraint becomes evidence of hidden knowledge. Your silence becomes evidence of hidden power. But here's the paradox that makes this philosophy truly dangerous. The less you need other people's recognition, the more recognizable you become. The less you need their approval, the more they want to give it. The less you need their understanding, the more they want to understand you. This happens because human beings are wired to pursue what moves away from them and to take for granted what moves toward them. When you stop moving toward their validation and instead become someone that validation moves toward, you've just inverted one of the most fundamental dynamics in human psychology. The professional implications of this shift are staggering. When you stop trying to prove you deserve the promotion and instead operate from the assumption that competence speaks for itself, you become the kind of person who actually deserves promotion. When you stop trying to convince clients to work with you and instead become someone they want to work with, your business transforms. When you stop trying to be impressive and start being genuinely useful, people become impressed as a side effect. This isn't about becoming passive or disengaged. It's about becoming so actively engaged with your own standards and goals that other people's opinions become background noise rather than the primary signal you're tuning into. Consider what happens in a negotiation when you no longer need the deal more than your counterpart needs to make it. Your willingness to walk away becomes your strongest negotiating position. Your indifference to their pressure becomes pressure itself. Your calm becomes their problem to solve. But we need to address the shadow side of this philosophy, because power without wisdom becomes tyranny, and silence without compassion becomes cruelty. The goal isn't to become emotionally unavailable or manipulatively withholding. The goal is to become so emotionally available to yourself that you don't need constant emotional input from others to maintain your equilibrium. True silent dominance comes from abundance, not scarcity. When you withhold your reaction because you're confident in your position, that's power. When you withhold your reaction because you're afraid of revealing weakness, that's just fear dressed up as strategy. The difference shows up in your body language, your energy, your micro-expressions. Real confidence has a quality of openness, even when it's not speaking. Real power radiates availability, even when it's not accessible. Real strength feels generous even when it's not giving. This brings us to the ultimate test of silent dominance. What happens when you're actually wrong? When someone's criticism is accurate, when their attack hits a real vulnerability, when their assessment exposes a genuine limitation. This is where most people's carefully constructed calm completely collapses. But the true practitioner of silent dominance has prepared for this moment by developing a relationship with their own fallibility that most people never achieve. They've learned to be wrong without being diminished, to be criticized without being devastated, to be exposed without being destroyed. When someone accurately identifies your mistake, you don't minimize it or justify it or deflect from it. You say, "You're absolutely right. Thank you for pointing that out." And you mean it. This response is so rare, so unexpected, so psychologically mature, that it often stops attacks in their tracks. People are prepared to deal with defensiveness, denial, or counterattack. They are not prepared to deal with genuine acceptance of accurate feedback. What you've just demonstrated is that you're strong enough to be wrong without your world ending. You've shown that your sense of worth doesn't depend on being perfect, which makes you infinitely more formidable than someone whose confidence is so fragile it can't survive contact with reality. This brings us to perhaps the most counterintuitive aspect of silent dominance. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is admit you don't know something. When someone asks you a question you can't answer, instead of bluffing or deflecting or turning it back on them, you say, "I don't know. How would you approach that?" This response transforms the dynamic from a test of your knowledge to a collaboration in discovering knowledge. It positions you as someone secure enough to learn rather than someone desperate to appear learned. And it often results in you gaining information that actually makes you more knowledgeable than if you had pretended to know what you didn't. The workplace implications of this approach are revolutionary. When you stop pretending to have answers you don't have, people start trusting the answers you do have. When you stop positioning yourself as infallible, people start seeing you as reliable. When you stop trying to be the smartest person in the room, you often become the most valuable person in the room. But let's return to the arena where silent dominance shows its most elegant face, dealing with genuine aggression, with people who aren't just disagreeing with you or testing you, but who are actively trying to harm your reputation, your relationships, your success. This is where the philosophy transcends strategy and becomes something approaching martial arts. When someone launches a coordinated attack on your character, when they're spreading rumors, building coalitions against you, trying to systematically undermine your position, the natural response is to mount an equally aggressive defense or counterattack. You do something they never see coming. You remain exactly who you are. You continue doing exactly what you've been doing, and you treat their campaign against you as weather you're observing from inside a solid building. You don't change your behavior to appease them. You don't change your behavior to spite them. You change nothing at all. This response is devastatingly effective because it refuses to give their attack the reaction it needs to sustain itself. Gossip feeds on defensiveness. Rumors grow stronger when they provoke desperate denials. Character assassination requires the target to either fight back or collapse, both of which give the attack credibility. When you do neither, when you continue operating from your own center as if their attack is happening to someone else entirely, you create a kind of psychological vacuum that pulls the energy out of their campaign. People watching this unfold begin to wonder, if the accusations were true, wouldn't you be more disturbed? If the attack was effective, wouldn't you be more disrupted? Your continued calm becomes evidence of either innocence or an unshakable inner foundation. Either interpretation works in your favor. But here's where the philosophy becomes truly profound. This isn't about tactics anymore. This is about becoming the kind of person for whom these tactics are simply natural expressions of who they are. You're not performing calm, you are calm. You're not strategically withholding. You genuinely have nothing to prove. You're not manipulatively silent. You simply have nothing that needs to be said. This transformation from technique to identity is what separates the practitioners from the masters. When silent dominance becomes your natural way of being rather than a tool you use, it stops being dominance at all. It becomes presence. And presence is the most fundamental form of power because it requires nothing from anyone else to sustain itself. The person who has achieved this level of integration doesn't win conflicts by being better at conflict. They win by being so completely themselves that conflict becomes irrelevant. They don't dominate others. They demonstrate what self-dominion looks like. And that demonstration is magnetic in ways that traditional dominance never is. This is the final paradox of silent dominance. The moment you no longer need to dominate anyone, you become irresistibly attractive to almost everyone. The moment you stop trying to control other people's perceptions, you gain more influence over those perceptions than you ever had when you were actively managing them. In a world full of people desperately performing their worth, authentically inhabiting your worth becomes the rarest and most compelling form of presence. In a culture obsessed with being heard, knowing when not to speak becomes the most eloquent form of communication. In an environment where everyone is trying to prove something, having nothing to prove becomes the ultimate proof. This is not about becoming cold or distant or emotionally unavailable. This is about becoming so warm, so present, so genuinely available that you don't need constant validation to maintain your temperature. You become your own source of heat, your own source of light, your own source of the energy that other people spend their lives desperately seeking from external sources. And when you become your own source, when you achieve that level of self-sufficiency without losing your capacity for connection, you discover something that changes everything. True power isn't about getting people to do what you want. True power is about becoming someone that people want to become. True dominance isn't about controlling others. True dominance is about demonstrating what self-control looks like when it's not afraid, not defensive, not performing for anyone's approval. The calm that leaves reputations bleeding while yours stands untouched isn't about destruction. It's about construction. The construction of a self so solid, so integrated, so genuinely at peace with its own existence, that it becomes a refuge in a world full of people at war with themselves. This is the final gift of silent dominance. It transforms you from someone who needs to win into someone who has already won the only game that matters. The game against your own insecurity, your own need for external validation, your own fear that you might not be enough exactly as you are. And when you win that game, when you achieve that victory, something extraordinary happens. You stop needing to dominate anyone, and paradoxically, you become the most naturally dominant presence in any room you enter. Not because you're trying to control anyone, but because you've achieved something so rare that it's automatically magnetic. Complete self-possession in a world full of people who have lost themselves. The silence that follows this realization isn't empty. It's full of everything you no longer need to say, everything you no longer need to prove, everything you no longer need anyone else to understand about you. And that fullness, that completeness, that profound self-sufficiency radiates outward like gravity, pulling everything else into orbit around the calm, unshakable center of who you've chosen to become. This is what it means to stand untouched in the smoke, while others burn themselves down, trying to light fires that cannot reach you.